incredible tantrums and outbursts. And then she would be telling me stuff about when they weren't there. You know, he said this, she said that, and so I used to find it incredibly stressful when my family were around. So I just stopped having them around, I guess. And looking back, it's interesting. A few of my old friends, I actually spoke to them recently. They got in contact after the TED talk, and they said we knew at the time that things were difficult, and apparently I was known as St. Andrew for having to put up with all this difficulty, and but none of them realised that there was violence. That was the thing that surprised them. They all, everything that I said in my TED talk about the gaslighting, about the sense of fear, they could see that. They could see this was a relationship in trouble. They just didn't particularly see the violence. And you know, looking back now, it's crazy because so when I was working in London, and there were a lot of attacks on my face, like with nails, keys being thrown at me, and I'd go into work with cuts on my face, and people would say, "Hey, what's up with your face?" And I'd be like, "Oh, you know, shaving, done it shaving." And every day, well, not every day, but I'd be like, "Oh, I had a shaving club. I've had a," and I often wondered, surely there'll be a day when someone says, "Surely you can't have that many shaving accidents. You know, we need to look into your shaving skills here." But at the time, you're going back. So when I was in this marriage, it was 1999 to 2008, and there wasn't very much awareness in the UK, and that is changing now. We even have police forces now when they do campaigns about domestic abuse that are very careful about having inclusive campaigns that reach out to parents abused by teenagers, which is becoming increasingly common in the UK. It's a big problem. And so I think it's changing. But if you go back to 2000, you know, there just wasn't that awareness. And so I liked the people that I worked with. They were good people, but they would never have asked. They would, because they just wouldn't have been aware of domestic abuse. It just wasn't really talked about.
Oh, so what I hear you say is that despite people seeing you so many times with a cut on your face, and despite people understanding that there must have been abuse in the relationship, nobody actually walked up to you and said, "Andrew, what's going on?" You know,
No.
that's very sad, because that's how we see that. We keep hesitating, and a lot of us do it, and I guess that's called the bystander effect, from what I understand, because uh, um, um, you always keep thinking that the other person will ask the question, or the other person will. And I guess we all have to be sensitized that, you know, the second we sense that something's going wrong, or we see someone with constant bruises and marks, I mean, those are very, very clear indications that there's abuse. And maybe the person going through abuse is just waiting for someone to ask them, you know, what are you going through, or talk to someone. So again, I would just say very, very sorry that you faced something like this. So Andrew, how did you move on from this relationship? I mean, how did you get out when no one was helping you, when
Well,
things were so
yeah.
bad?
Well, and it follows on really from what I've just said, because the first time someone directly challenged me got me thinking. So, as I mentioned in my TEDx talk, the first thing that as I open up that TEDx talk, a neighbor. So I was living at the time in the south of France, and we were living and the lifestyle was very much, nobody locked their front doors. There was no crime there. So a lady next door was actually an English lady, also living in the south of France. She was good friends with us, and she'd heard next door this commotion, this outburst. And as she walked into our house, because it was getting worse and worse, she witnessed my ex-wife stabbing me in the arm with a pencil. And there was a lot of blood on my arm and whatever. And she took my ex-wife next door with her to calm down. But later that evening, that neighbor, I remember saying to me, she's a very well-to-do lady. I remember her saying, "Andrew, this is domestic abuse. You do realize." And I remember thinking, domestic abuse, is it? And for the first time, I started to think, well, maybe this isn't my fault, because something that abused people often believe is that it is their fault. And I know for me, I always felt, listen, a stronger man, a cleverer man this wouldn't be happening. So I need to become this better person. And, I was always my ex-wife's greatest defender. Oh, she's had a hard upbringing. She's really tired. She's really stressed. I need to do more so that she doesn't get so upset. And that's what abused people do. But when that neighbor challenged me, said, Andrew, this is domestic abuse, that was the first time I really started to think about it. And I didn't leave then. That was about a year before the relationship broke down. But that challenge started something in my mind. And about a year later, in a way, it was really good fortune. It's going to sound awful, but it was a good fortune. My ex-wife, she kicked me out of the house, and I didn't want to go. We had children together, and but I didn't know this at the time. She was having an affair with her best friend's partner, and for a few months, we were going to marriage guidance, and I was trying to work out how could we get back together again. I was worried about the kids, and then about 3 months of being apart from her, I was like, I'm quite happy being apart from her. This is good. I don't want to go back to her. And so when her affair, her relationship with this other fella, and when this other guy, when it broke down, she came back to me and she was like, "Oh, maybe we'll work this out." I was like, "Well, I'm done here. I don't want to go back." And then there was a few months where she put me under a lot of pressure, and she used our daughters and was very manipulative in the way that she did. And I was kind of a bit wobbly. I wasn't sure, but I was like, no, I definitely don't want to go back to this. And I started to realize how much I've been lied to and manipulated. And I think having that time on my own was hugely important. Had I not had that, would I still be there today? Possibly, possibly.
Oh, so a couple of things, Andrew, is that I did read in an article somewhere that abusers typically like to target those people who are actually intelligent and smarter than them, because when they target someone who's smarter than them, that's when they actually pose a challenge to the abuser. With someone who just gives into everything, it isn't really a challenge. And I just read this, so I don't know how verified it is,
Interesting.
but it was a fact. So when you talked about being stronger and cleverer for her, and justifying the abuse in your own mind, I think a lot of us who are facing abuse do that. We kind of try and justify the abuser's behavior. And what I wanted to showcase with this question is the fact that when you do, you can take out some time, in Indian context, maybe stay with your parents or stay with your friends, create that physical distance and see how things are working out, to kind of see whether you can walk away from a relationship, especially in cases where people are economically dependent or have economic issues with each other. So you did take some time to realize that, hey, I like this, I'm no longer willing to go back. So what were your learnings, Andrew? After what did you learn after you walked out of this marriage, and what was the aha moment for you, where you kind of said that, okay, this is when I'm going to start speaking up. So what was
Yeah.
that really like?
Well, there's a few points to that. I think a few things that I learned was, when I first came out of the marriage, I was a little bit angry. It's not that I didn't like women. Listen, I've got two sisters. I've got a mum. I've always loved women. Women are fantastic creatures. But I felt like, if I ever get married again, there's going to be prenups. No woman's going to mess me about anymore. And I was all, and coming out of that, I suddenly thought, but that's not me. I'm not that person. I don't want to be like that. And so for me, one of the biggest learning points is this important sense of having some boundaries that are reasonable. And you see, too often we think of boundaries as these brick walls that we put around ourselves to stop ourselves being taken advantage of. But for me, that kind of thinking can lead to you becoming very selfish. If everything becomes a brick wall, then it's always going to be your way. You're always going to be fighting. And so for me, boundaries, you have to have your brick wall boundaries that communicate your values and your principles. But you also need your flexible fencing boundaries, things where it matters to you a bit, but you would give some ground. And then you also need boundaries where these are your preferences, but you know what? I'd happily roll over. It's fine. And you need a suite of boundaries. And I really felt coming out of this, I want to preserve the lovely bit that is me, but I realize that there are some things I need to be stronger on. I need stronger red flags. I need to know what I'm going to do. And so it really helped me developing those boundaries. I had a couple of I had a couple of girlfriends where it wasn't the right match, but the relationship itself was fine. But by having those boundaries, I was like, no, this isn't quite right. And then finally, I met my wife, who I'm married to today, who's just brilliant, and we're soulmates, and that's great. But I, I think the key thing, my plea to men and women coming out of abuse is, whoever you were abused by, don't hate that gender, because within that gender, there'll be people that will back you and support you and stand up for you. And, there are wonderful women in the UK fighting for men's rights, and there are wonderful men fighting for women's rights. This is how it should be. We should all be fighting for each other. We should be calling out those that would divide us. We should be tackling the abuse. We should be developing perpetrator programs for men and for women to help them get better if we can. So this is so the boundaries was a really important thing that I learned about. I mean, the fact that I'm talking about it today is simply because I've gone through the family court system now, and I'm out the other side. And so that's given me some freedom to talk about it. I probably wouldn't have talked about it 3 or 4 years ago, because I was caught up in the family courts trying to sort stuff out with my daughters, and I wouldn't. So for that reason, I'm speaking about it today. But yeah, probably my biggest learning point is the one around boundaries.
Oh, thank you so much. It's absolutely correct. I think you mentioned two types of boundaries. One is your firm boundaries, which are based on your values and ethics, and the other is your flexible boundaries. And in India, Andrew, we have arranged marriages. We still have arranged marriages, and I always tell everyone who's going in for an arranged match that relationships have evolved, times have evolved, things are no longer the same that they used to be 20 years ago. And so if you're getting into a new relationship with someone and you've not met or not known that person, or even if you know that person, it's good to do kind of an exercise where you say, these are my acceptables and these are my non-acceptables, and these are things I will be a little flexible on, and these are things, and you do them before you actually get married to the person. And if you see any red flags, don't hesitate in asking someone for help, because what we do is we do notice the red flags, but we kind of try and justify and then fall into those behavior patterns
And
again.
I think that's right. But the challenge, though, with the red flags, I'm so proud of my daughter. You'll like this. So she's 15 now, and she had her first boyfriend about 6 months ago. A really handsome, the super cool kid. Everybody wanted to be his girlfriend, and she's really pleased with herself, and that's great. But within a few weeks, he started to become really controlling over what she wore, over what she did. He was beginning to belittle her, and so guess what? She dumped him. She's like, "I'm not putting up with this. See you later." He was so shocked. He was like, "You can't dump me." He'd never been dumped before. But the point is with that is that if you're going to act on your red flags, that requires self-discipline. That requires you to let go of things that you might want to hold on to. That requires you to put your red flags before what you feel in your heart sometimes. And that's really hard. That takes a willingness to sacrifice and make those red flags really key to your decision making. It's easier said than done. It's not easy.
Right, right. But I think to an extent maybe a little necessary. So I think it is a lot of investment getting into a relationship. And thank you for sharing that story about your daughter, because we see that the children who've grown up in abusive environments also sort of tend to imbibe what's going on. And a lot of parents who don't leave is because of the children. And what you don't realize is it's actually better to leave for the children than to leave than to stay in a marriage that's not
Yeah.
working. So, Andrew, if you had to give one message to everyone on what you faced, or what they should think about, or anything with respect to domestic abuse, what is it that you would want to say? That one overarching message.
One overarching message. Wow. Um, I think to those caught in abuse, somehow talk to someone, because the abusers rely on you staying silent and allowing yourself to remain bullied. And so just talk to someone that can give you some sense of wise another angle, because the whole thing of gaslighters and abusers making you think you're going crazy and you don't know what to believe anymore. Talk to someone. And for anybody not caught in abuse, just realize, it happens to men and women. As far as we're aware, it happens to more women than men. But it does happen to men and women. And there are different faces to domestic abuse. Like we mentioned, there's a lot of parents. A very good friend of mine is a single mum. She's been knocked about by her teenage daughters. She feels like she's a rubbish mum. She really, but because there still isn't a really inclusive message with domestic abuse, and we need to understand there's many faces domestic abuse, and we need to be open to it. And if you think someone isn't quite themselves anymore, then ask if they're okay, if they're really okay. Sure, making the suggestion, are you being abused? If you're wrong and they're not, we might feel a bit stupid, but you can definitely really ask them if they're okay. Everyone says, oh yeah, no, I'm fine. But really ask if someone's okay. That's different.
True, true, true. We often go with suggestive questions like, "Are you being abused?" And that's absolutely not okay. And what we are trying to do, Andrew, is probably put a bystander intervention in place, where we kind of work with people to sensitize them that if you really have to talk to someone, what is the right way to do it? And thank you for bringing up that point, because it's so relevant. Ask if they are okay, and you keep asking them if they are okay till they actually answer your question. You say,
Yeah.
and it's not okay to keep quiet around people who are being abused at all. And I think the audience will be very keen, and I see a whole lot of discussions. I'm not following the discussions at all, but I would ask people to keep their questions ready, because we will be freeing up Andrew in another 5 or 7 minutes. And probably I think one of the questions that I will ask you, and this was, I know, not on the list of questions that I was going to ask you, is what were the red flags of this relationship that you had, and what exactly did you kind of tend to look over, and how did it help?
I'll give you an example. So you asked me about the lies, didn't you?
Right.
Yeah.
The red flags that you said, there were a few red flags.
Well,
It was there right from the beginning. Uh,
yeah.
so what were those things that you noticed?
There was, I'll tell you. So we'd been going out about 3 months in London, and that's where we met. And we went out to a restaurant, and we'd had a few drinks, but not many. She'd had a couple of glasses of wine, but that was it. And we were getting the train back to her flat, and she suddenly looked at me and just ran away from me across the train. I didn't know what was going on, so I kind of run after her. Is she all right? What's going on? She's then running and she looks scared and stricken, and she's and I'm like, I honestly, I have no idea what's going on. I managed to sort of somehow get on the same train, but she's not talking to me. She's all gone a bit just strange, and I'm like, are you okay? What's wrong? She then gets off the train. She then starts saying she's going to commit suicide. She's going to step in the road, and I'm like, why? And obviously today, I'm 45. If faced with that, I was dating, I'd be like, this isn't usual behavior. This is a major red flag. But at the time, I cared about her. I wanted to help her. What was the problem? And so there were things like that where I think some of it was I was young and I was naive and perhaps immature. And it's a fairly obvious red flag. The, the, the violence probably started at 3 or 4 months. There were also some big stories. I remember her saying early on that she'd been abused by her brother, but I mustn't tell anyone. And but now she's got a good relationship with her brother. And there's some things that just didn't completely stack up, and I just kind of overlooked them. Whereas now, with the life experience I have, I wouldn't overlook those things.
So what you're essentially saying, that it could have been just something that was made to get your sympathy, and make you feel more protective towards, because you're a nice person. So that's how you feel when you hear about someone going through a bad time. You just feel bad for them, and you feel, oh, I should help this person, or I should be around them. And yes. So if there are any signs of unusual behavior, thank you for letting us know. Yes, we should definitely flag it off. Um, One more question, and this is my last question to you, and I will leave it open to the audience now. After this last question, so please ask Andrew your questions. Is what is the kind of support? So UK has, I don't know, we don't have any statistics to tell us how many men are getting abused, but we do know that men face abuse. But in UK, there are statistics, and like you're saying, one third of the men get abused. So there must be a support system that has been created for male victims of domestic violence. What is that support system? Is there anything that the government does in terms of help, and how do you get help from counselors? What are
Yeah,
those?
I mean,
Do
this
you have
is
any of those?
you're now beginning to ask about. It's a bit of a political, we say a
Right.
political hot potato, where there's a lot of so there are male abuse. The predominant women's organisations, Women's Aid and Refuge UK, are very large organisations.
Yes.
They've obviously had their funding cut in times of austerity, but they still get a lot of money from the government. Men's organisations are very few and far between, and those that operate do tend to operate in a very balanced way. They're not about just men's rights, but they are saying, listen, your men get abused too. But they operate on what we say is a shoestring budget, very little funding from the government. And so we have a situation at the moment where the domestic abuse bill is going through Parliament in the UK, and the
Mhm.
only groups being asked to give witness are women's groups and women survivors, which is ridiculous when a third of victims are men. And so there isn't very much funding. There are some support groups popping up around the UK, often run by volunteers, about men's mental health, suicide prevention, domestic abuse, kind of coffee club type things. Um, but I mean, until recently, um, there were no refuge places at all in London that were given up for men, but hundreds for women. Now, obviously, we need more refuge places for women, but we do need some for men, at least, And so I think I would say to you, there is some support. There's definitely a growing awareness, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. The other thing I would say for statistics in the UK, there's a group called, I've got nothing to do with them, but they're called the Mankind Initiative, and
Mankind.
they are their research is very balanced. They're very keen on detail. So if they get some findings, they'll look at the sample. Was this sample, has this given us the right? They're not just about campaigning and getting a certain message. They want to get to the heart of what is true and what is not true. So the stuff that they publish is generally accurate and well balanced.
Okay, perfect. So that's very good to hear actually, because a lot of learning. So the Indian system also is very broken. It's actually broken for women and men both. And I know because I have some males who do reach out to me, men who do reach out to me, and they are in distress, and I sometimes really don't know what to offer them, because apart from counseling and apart from the ability to be able to see through what's happening to them, there's really nothing that we can help them with at this point. And so some of these things will eventually feed into a lot of changes that we are trying to bring in to the whole domestic abuse space. So I think I will now, Andrew, open it up to questions from the audience. So is there any question from the audience? Would anyone like to ask Andrew uh, something? So, Sai Monica, was there a question, Monica? You said you had to ask something. Let's see. So, Monica asks you, Andrew. I just got the question. A father who is verbally abused and mentally disturbed by his wife's behavior couldn't leave her because of the children, and adjusting the space of the responsibilities and children's future. What would you personally suggest for that situation? So Andrew, did you understand the question, or should I
I think so.
read
It's
it?
around kind of the dilemma that I faced and agonized over, and probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make,
Hmm.
because to leave my daughters in the hands of an abusive person isn't a great option. However, if I try and leave with the children, and bearing in mind my ex-wife is middle class, she's very articulate, she knows how to play the system. If I left with the children and made all kinds of allegations of domestic abuse, no one's going to believe me. I'd never reported it because I'd always thought it was my fault until the very end. And so it's very difficult to make that decision. I, in the end, just worked on the basis that at the moment, when I was in that relationship, my daughters had a shadow of a man, whereas not in that situation, when they did at least see me, they had a dad, who was a functioning dad. And I felt, therefore, that I should leave. I also was feeling increasingly confident from the research that I'd done in the UK that if my ex-wife blocked my contact with my daughters, there was a good chance I would get it back through the family courts, where our family court system is broken in many ways. But again, awareness has improved on certain things. And it's a bit of a lottery. It depends on which judge you get. But increasingly, I see dads and my friends where their ex-wives have been unreasonable about their contact with their kids. They've taken it to court, and the outcome from court has been very expensive, but the outcome has been very sensible, what the judge has recommended. So I think for me, it was a massive dilemma. There's no easy answers. But yeah.
So Monica, I hope you heard that, and I think what Andrew kind of said also resonated, because instead of being a dad who's not present, walking out of an abusive relationship, leaving your children, there is not an easy choice. But he would have probably been stuck in a relationship like that for a very long time, and he would have been the shadow of the person he said he was. So I hope that answers a part of your question, because there is no wrong or right for a question like this. Um, Anil, I see that you've raised your hand. I would request you to type the question in the chat, please. I see that you've raised. I see Sneha has also raised her hand. Request everyone to send their questions. So Dr. Zara asks Andrew, how do we differentiate between an abuser and someone who abuses occasionally and says it is because of mental illness?
I mean, these are good questions. They're good questions, and not easy. I think for me, I would say here's an answer. A good friend of mine was in an abusive relationship, but frankly, both he and his partner, who was female, they were both abusive towards each other. For me, it was a dysfunctional relationship. They both were physically violent towards each other at times. They were both absolutely nasty to each other at times. So I think in some ways it is down to the individual. I do think behind my ex-wife's behavior, there were undiagnosed mental health issues, but I think you can only reflect on the impact of that on you. You see, the relationship of my two friends, who I mentioned, a female and male, it was mutually abusive, I think, with a fairly even balance. So how do you pick that apart? Well, they should probably both go their separate ways, and they have done now, to be fair, but they were together for a long time. For me, an abusive relationship truly is where someone is really bullied. And sometimes that bullying can be quite subtle. Sometimes it can be really obvious. But if on reflection, you're clear that you are quite bullied, that there is real dominance in either the male or the female, then I would be saying, red flags, you might need to move on. But if the dominance is shared, if you give back as much as you get, then it becomes a harder question to answer.
Right. So, Zara, I hope this answers your question. I would also like to chip in a bit of a line there. You say, how do we differentiate between an abuser and someone who abuses occasionally? So there is no measurement of how much you need to be abused for someone to be called an abuser. Whether you do it occasionally, or whether someone does it occasionally or does not do it occasionally, it is abuse. But yes, if someone says mental illness is the cause, I think definitely there is a psychiatrist that is required to intervene in such a case. So we have Dr. Kirti Bolineni, very senior domestic abuse professional herself. Welcome, Dr. Kirti. And she says, Andrew, is there a helpline for men facing domestic violence in UK?
Yes, there is. And again, this has been a there's been a scandal around it to some degree, because some of the organisations, the main women's organisations, Women's Aid and Refuge, they run male helplines, but there has been a scandal as to whether you can access those lines 24/7 as a woman could. There have been allegations that women are not screened to check whether they're telling the truth, but men are. So there are helplines. I don't think they run brilliantly, but there are some helplines. There is a national domestic abuse helpline. Generally, when people come to me through Twitter and through the TED Talk, which they do, I'm happy to give some online support. But generally, if they need support, I send them to Mankind Initiative, who can help them from there, because they are a men's organisation. They do have a helpline, but they are horribly under-resourced for the job that they have to do. And that, so, but the simple answer to your question is there are helplines, and those helplines have reported an increase as well during COVID lockdown of calls from men.
Yes, yes, yes. That's something I think we are seeing across the world. Incidences of domestic violence going up, and people keep asking me, have victims of domestic violence gone up? And I say no. A lot of them would have been victims from the past as well, but it's become worse because you're just thrown into the same space with your abuser. Let me see. Sneha asks a question. How do we help such victims more effectively?
Are we talking just victims in general or male victims?
Ekta, may I just speak my question, because I think the chat has put. Okay. So Andrew, my question is that, there is one more friend of mine called Jyoti, and we both deal with a lot of men who have been domestically abused, or they are undergoing a false accusations under rape and a lot of other women-oriented laws. The problem is that they see that there is somebody who's counseling them just to vent out. They are not becoming solution oriented. They're not getting they don't want to have solution. They just want to be heard, and which is why they are getting back to that vicious circle again. And the social pressure and the social stigma of leaving your wife and knowing somebody who has just abandoned the wife and the kids, or just the wife, is actually eating them up, and they don't want to go ahead and speak to anybody about it. First, if they want to speak, they just want to rant about the problem, but not find the solution for it. So how do we help such people to evolve out of that problem and come back to their senses and see that there is a solution available? They need to work it out. So how do we help such people? How do we make them realize that one needs to accept that I have a problem, that I'm dealing with a problem, and I need a solution for it? How do we go about it?
Well, again, I mean, there's no easy answer. And obviously everybody's progress is at their own journey. And if one of the things I said earlier in the webinar was that, I had this wake up call from my neighbor, but it was a year later until I came to that position of resolve where I was going to move on. And the only reason I came to that place was my ex-wife, my now ex-wife, had kicked me out anyway. So I had that space. So there are no easy answers for anybody stuck in abuse. And I think that it's frustrating for domestic abuse professionals working with women and men, where it's clearly really, really bad, but they just don't seem to be able to move on. And so it's one thing that I do think that I've seen work quite well in the UK for men is that I do see these little groups popping up. Obviously, it's been impacted by COVID because we can't meet in the same way. But these kind of easygoing kind of meeting up for coffee, just to chat in a safe space, and understanding that the journey will take time. But getting men together where they realize, actually, I'm not the only one facing this. They're in small groups, but doing it with skilled facilitators, so it doesn't just become a slandering women kind of a thing, which would be wrong. We don't want that. We want men to realize that actually women are fabulous creatures, but they're just in an unfortunate situation that they need to take action on. So for me, once we come out of COVID, I want to do more work on more of these smaller local groups that are quite easygoing. There's no membership. You just turn up as and when you can, and get something fairly regular. Good coffee for me. It can't. Let's not have rubbish coffee. Let's show respect and have good coffee. Get people chatting, and to me that's helpful. And the reason why that's good alongside one-to-one counselling is you're putting men in a situation where they can see they're not alone.
Right.
But you do need a facilitator who can stop it becoming a group that just complains about women, because we don't want that either.
Right. Thank you, Sneha, for that excellent question. We have another question, which is a slightly disturbing question. This is from Abrar. So he asks, what should men do if the wife alleges a husband's impotency after an external argument? Abrar, can I, let me see if I can unmute you. I am not sure. Did you understand the question, Andrew?
I think so. I mean, I think if I understand the question, obviously there are cultural differences between the UK and India, but I experienced that. What this gentleman has said, because abusers will try and be as cruel and as horrible as they can, and there were all kinds of stories put about in the local community where we were living, and what did I do? I ignored it. What else can I do? For me in my culture, I'm not going to respond aggressively. All you can do is ignore it, and it's humiliating. And you're walking down the street and you're thinking, I wonder what people are thinking of me. It's not very nice. But to me, there came a point where, and it did come more quickly than you might think, where I learned to laugh at how absurd all these stories were. And I tried to find the humor in them. That might sound strange, but that's how I tried to cope with it, because the stories there were all kinds of things put around about me, and it's very hard. But I think the most important thing is that you can continue to move on from that relationship as best you can, but with dignity and without becoming aggressive yourself, and remaining peaceful and composed. It's so important.
I completely agree. Thank you, Andrew, for that answer. I think, Abrar, what Andrew also said was very relevant, because it's not just about the topic of impotency. It's about just someone trying to show you down and saying nasty things about you and your abilities. So it could be it could be a physical ability, mental ability. It could be the way you present yourself, talk, walk, anything. And so, like he said, the best way is to try and get out with dignity. And I hope that answers your question. Andrew, we have another very special guest on the webinar. We have Andrew Fleming, who is a British diplomat in Hyderabad, which is the city I live in. And I will unmute Andrew for a second. Andrew, we would love it if you could just say a couple of words on the webinar. If you're there, it would be great.
Hello. Hi, Andrew. Hi, Andrew. Hi. Thanks. No, it was great. I'm really happy that this event has been organised by Good Universe and their friends. I enjoyed listening very much to what you had to say, insofar as one can listen to such a harrowing experience. But I think it's so important that these kind of stories are being told. I mean, I know of a few cases after living in India for 3 years where some of this kind of thing is going on. And I previously lived in Nigeria for 3 years, and certainly there was one particularly horrific case involving one of my colleagues, who, as far as I know, is still in that relationship because they have 4 children, and I think many people are. So your points about looking out for people, looking for warning signs, all of that also really resonate. But I mean, I think, it is a global problem. And when I was tweeting about this today, some of the responses I got from people were like, yeah, but this doesn't happen in India, which is really alarming. And I commented in the chat that, the situation here is probably a little bit like it was in the UK when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done to get through that stigma. It's not perfect in the UK, as you acknowledge yourself, but we have come a hell of a long way from back in those days. It's still very much like that. And I think, it's something that probably needs to be fast-tracked as much as possible, learning lessons from speakers like you and others. So thank you very much. And, I'm really interested to hear the reaction from other participants, either here or otherwise online. And again, thank you to the organizers.
Bless you. Thank you. Keep safe.
So I think we are also running out of time, and we have a couple of statements, not really so much questions. It's appreciate your answer, Andrew. Thanks for the wisdom. And somebody says, Monica says, I like the statement, don't hate the gender if you faced abuse. I am extremely grateful to hear from you and feel happy that you are leading a happy life. Dominative behaviors and women who always want their power and control over men. How can men face women who are extremely selfish? I have seen people who are not able to escape in the form of divorce, fearing for social loss.
Yeah. I mean, and I recognize I'm very lucky because I have a family around me, and I do work with a charity at the moment where we work with people that have been homeless, and sometimes working with men caught in substance abuse, and that could have been me a time. I lost a lot when I moved on, but I had a strong family. I've been hugely blessed, and not everybody has that. So I recognize. Some people say, "Oh, you're amazing for having moved on." It's like, well, it's kind of a team effort. Like I say, my sisters, my mum, my dad. I've had good friends. I've got my lovely wife today, and maybe that it requires a team effort for people to move on, and maybe that's a challenge for us all.
Andrew, we have one question from Anil, and it's, I guess, going to be the last question of the day because I think we are very close to closing time.
Okay.
So he says, Andrew, do you have cautions for those going through divorce from an abusive partner? Do you have any word of caution for them?
Well, yes, absolutely. And it's a question I often get asked. I don't know how the family courts operate in India, but in the UK, when you're separating from an abusive person, and if you have children, that abusive person, the abuse won't stop. It just evolves, and it centers now on the children, and it becomes a game of psychological warfare. But you must keep your communication polite and reasonable and focused on the needs of the children. Do not get drawn into sending angry texts because you've had your contact blocked again. You mustn't be angry in the family courts. You've got to be composed and peaceful. So my plea to a lot of people, and again on social media, don't go and moan about it on social media. Be very cautious about social media if you're in the family courts, and make sure that your abuser doesn't wind you up into a state of anger, because it is horrible that you have to stay very calm if you're going through the family courts. You certainly do in the UK. I don't know how they operate in India. And just to accept that it takes time to repair. It takes time to heal. But as we have a saying here about the grass being greener on the other side of the hill.
Right.
And I would say it is greener on the other side of the hill. But first of all, you have to wade on your hands and knees. You have to crawl through the mud and the slime. But you will get to that green grass. It's just you got to crawl through the mud first. So it will be tough. It will be difficult. But there will be better times ahead. So just don't give up. I guess that'd be my message.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew. That was a brilliant message. Anil, I would just like to add one small point to it. And there's a lot of stigma with respect to mental health and seeking help from a counselor or a psychiatrist. And I would say that anyone who's going through any kind of domestic violence, please do not hesitate to go to a counselor. Reach out to us if you need help. We are always around. It doesn't matter to us. The gender of the person does not matter to us at all. Please do reach out if there's anyone in distress. Andrew, and this is addressed to Andrew Fleming, that Andrew, you said that you had a few friends who were going through, and if there's anyone who needs any help, I mean, we can definitely help with good counseling and good counselors and people who are neutral like us. And I think it has been a brilliant session. And is there anyone who would like to give any closing remarks? We have about 5 minutes of the session left to go, and if there's anyone who would like to share their views, I will just unmute one person. Oh, brilliant, Andrew. So you're a trained counselor. Oh, that's very interesting. So we will be sharing his website. You can reach out to him, and you can definitely ask for help, because I think everything that he has said on the webinar today has been so relevant from the point of view of whether it really didn't matter that Andrew was from UK, and things may be different there or culturally different here. It really didn't matter whether the abuse was about men or women. I think we resonated with all the messages there. And if there is someone who wants to add a closing point to it, I'm more than happy to unmute you and give you a couple of minutes to say your goodbyes. And if you see, we've shared Andrew's website link also on the group.
Yeah, myself, Monica Ekta. Can I proceed?
Sure. Please, Monica.
Yeah, I'm extremely grateful to be a part of this session, because this made a huge difference, in understanding the perceptions of men also, how they do, how they face abuse, and how they react and respond. Not all or not everybody who will talk about it and who will solve and sit just like that. But Andrew, you took a step forward to make a difference in someone else's life. That is extremely positive for others also. So I'm so happy to be a part of this session, and definitely you inspired a lot of people out there. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Andrew, is there something you would like to say to close the session with? Any closing words that you would like to?
I mean, it's been a real privilege to be here, and let's just keep that conversation going. And we're all on social media, and let's try and be as supportive of each other as we can, because there are some angry and hurt people on social media, and it's important that we just that we're as supportive of each other as we can. I think we've said a lot during this session. But no, it's been an absolute pleasure. Absolute honor to do this with you, and I'm so impressed by your work. It's brilliant to see your work with men and women. I totally salute you. You're doing a great work.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We are hoping that post this session we will have a lot more men reaching out to us. And thank you, because this is a problem that transcends a lot of boundaries. And for everyone, we suggest that you please watch Andrew's TEDx talk, because he has spoken in detail. It's a beautiful talk. I watched it. I just couldn't stop myself from reaching out to him. And so with that, I think we will end today's session. Thank you very much for everyone who came in. Thank you, Andrew, for taking out the time to do this. And please do keep in touch with us on social media.
Definitely will. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.